The morning sun crept through the torn edges of the kitchen curtain, casting soft lines across the cracked floor. Adaobi, 20, dark-skinned and oval-faced, stood barefoot by the firewood stove, her hands moving swiftly as she flipped yam slices, sizzling in the pan. A faded wrapper clung to her slender waist, and the steam rising from the pot curled into her tired eyes. Her hair was neatly packed in a low bun, always neat, always quiet, always invisible. Behind her, Chinwee's laughter echoed from the sitting room. The television was on full volume, and Adaobi could hear the rhythm of the latest Afrobeat song playing through the walls. Chinwe, 24, light-skinned and confident, lounged on the sofa in a silk robe, her polished toes tapping the floor as she scrolled through her phone. She hadn't lifted a finger since morning, and she never needed to. Why should she, when Adaobi existed? "Adaobi!" Mama Chinwee's sharp voice rang out from the corridor. "Have you washed the bathroom, or are you waiting for an angel to come do it?" The older woman stepped in, her scarf tied tightly around her head, her eyes scanning the room like a commander inspecting a battlefield. "Useless girl. You eat here for free, you might as well work." "Yes, Ma," Adaobi replied quietly, not looking up. There was no point. Any protest would only lead to more insults, maybe even a slap. Her arms ached. Her heart ached more. She moved from chore to chore like a shadow, washing, cooking, sweeping, the same every day. Her room was a small corner in the boys' quarters, barely large enough for her mattress and a tin box that held all her belongings. But the worst part wasn't the poverty. It was the way they looked at her, as if she didn't belong, as if she was a burden they were forced to carry. Once in a while, when the shouting stopped and Chinwe went out to meet her friends, Adaobi would steal away to the back of the compound, where an old mango tree stretched its arms to the sky. She would sit beneath it with her knees tucked into her chest, listening to the birds, the wind, and her own breath. That tree was the only place that didn't judge her. She'd talk to it sometimes, whispering her fears, her anger, her dreams. "I just want to be loved," she said one evening, watching the sun paint orange strokes across the sky. Not used, not ignored, just seen. No one knew what Adaobi carried in her chest, the weight of losing both parents in a fire when she was just 12, the loneliness that came after, the quiet wars she fought every single day. Even in her silence, she had grown strong. But that strength came at a cost. She didn't know how to ask for help anymore. She didn't expect kindness. She had learned how to survive in a house that reminded her daily, "You're not one of us." Inside, Chinwe was laughing again, probably talking to another man, planning another party. And Mama Chinwe? She was pacing, already plotting the next errand, the next opportunity to remind Adaobi of her place. But Adaobi didn't cry. Not today. She wiped her hands on her wrapper, looked up at the tree and whispered softly, "One day I'll leave this place. One day someone will see me and not turn away." And with that small hope tucked deep inside her, she stood up and returned to the house, silent, steady, unseen, but still holding on. It started with whispers, quiet ones that floated through the corridor like perfume. Chinwe had caught the attention of someone important, someone wealthy, a businessman named Obiora, in his mid-30s. A man who once stood tall among the elites in Lagos, commanding meetings with nothing but a glance. That was before the accident. A car crash that took his sight, his fiancé, and nearly his life. Now blind, he had retreated to his estate in the east, surrounded by silence, wealth, and a family desperate to see him rebuild. When Obiora's people reached out through a mutual church contact, they were looking for a quiet, cultured young woman. Chinwe fit the image perfectly, at least on the surface. Fair-skinned, well-spoken, fashionable. Mama Chinwe glowed with pride as she prepared her daughter like a prized jewel. "He's still rich," she said with a grin. "Who cares if he can't see?" The first meeting happened in a modest hotel lounge. Chinwe arrived dressed in gold lace, her perfume too strong, her smile too forced. Obiora sat still, wearing a dark senator outfit, his walking stick resting beside him. His face was unreadable, eyes glassy but calm. "Nice to meet you," he said. Chinwe barely replied. Throughout the conversation, she scrolled on her phone, yawned more than once, and ended the meeting with a muttered, "I can't do this. I'm not marrying a blind man, I beg." Obiora heard it. He heard everything. He sat there, humiliated, as Chinwe and her mother walked out, whispering. Later that night, thunder cracked over the compound as Mama Chinwe paced. Her face was hard, calculating. The alliance was slipping. The money, the connection, the status. It was all dissolving because of Chinwe's arrogance. Then her eyes landed on Adaobi, who was quietly washing dishes in the backyard. She didn't speak right away. She watched. And then she called her. "Come here." Adaobi wiped her hands and approached, unsure. "You'll marry him." Adaobi blinked. "Ma? You heard me. Obiora, the man Chinwe rejected. His people are still interested. I told them about you, said you're respectful, obedient, humble. They agreed." "I don't understand," Adaobi stammered. "I've never even met him." "Which is exactly why it will work," Mama Chinwe snapped. "You won't give them any trouble. You'll marry him and behave yourself. This family cannot afford to shame itself further." But why me?" Mama Chinwe's voice dropped. "You think you'll ever get someone better? You're an orphan. No dowry. No background. I feed you. I clothe you. This is your chance to repay me. Or you leave this house." The words landed like cold water. For 2 nights, Adaobi didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling of her tiny room, heart pounding. She didn't want to marry a stranger. She didn't want a life of servitude in another man's home. But where would she go? She had no one, nowhere. In this world, even silence had a price. The wedding was rushed. A few elders from Obiora's side, Mama Chinwe, and a priest. No music, no cake. Adaobi wore a borrowed cream gown. Obiora said his vows in a tired, detached tone. When the priest said, "You may now hold hands," he didn't move. Adaobi forced a smile. They rode in silence to his mansion afterward, a wide, cold structure with tiled floors that echoed every step. Obiora's driver carried her bag. She clutched a small Bible in her lap, the one thing that had belonged to her late mother. The moment she entered, Obiora said, "Your room is to the left." No warmth, no welcome, just instructions. She nodded and went in. That night, Adaobi sat on her new bed, surrounded by expensive furniture that meant nothing to her. She stared at the mirror, at her own tired reflection, and whispered, "So this is what becoming a wife feels like." There were no tears, only silence, and the dull ache of a heart already surrendering. The mansion was large, too large for just 2 people, yet it felt even emptier than it looked. Cold marble floors stretched endlessly from one room to another. Expensive curtains hung stiffly over windows that no longer mattered to the man who could not see. Obiora lived like a ghost, moving from the study to his room, and sometimes to the small garden where he sat silently, his walking stick resting across his lap like a forgotten companion. Adaobi adjusted quickly to the rhythm of the house, though it felt nothing like home. Each morning she rose before the sun, her bare feet brushing the cold tiles as she swept, cleaned, and arranged things he might need. She wasn't sure what his routine used to be, but she figured silence was safest. She cooked his meals and left them at the edge of the dining table without a word. By the next hour the food would be gone, but he never called for her, never said thank you. Obiora assumed she had played a part in the switch, that somehow she had manipulated her way into his life. In his mind, she was just like Chinwe, a quiet actress playing the long game. So he ignored her. His words, when they came, were clipped and distant. "Keep the noise down. Don't rearrange my books. That's all." Adaobi obeyed without complaint, but when he wasn't around, she noticed small things, the way his shirts were left crumpled in his wardrobe, the dust gathering on his windowsill, the untouched piano in the corner of the hallway. She cleaned everything without being asked. Not for praise, but because it was her way of coping. Working gave her structure. Silence gave her a place to hide her grief. Still, the loneliness crept in. At night, she'd lie on the small bed in her room, facing the ceiling, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Tears would gather, but she swallowed them. The walls were thin. She didn't want him to hear her crying. She didn't want to be seen as weak. One day, as she dusted the bookshelf in his study, she found a leather-bound journal with braille markings and a few worn pages sticking out. Without touching it too much, she tore a small piece of paper from her own notepad and wrote, "Even the night has a morning. Hang in there." She slid it gently into the book and left. She didn't know if he saw it, but the next day, the note was gone. So she wrote another. Healing is slow, but it's still healing. One day at a time. She tucked that one under his teacup. Still no words from him. But she noticed he didn't frown as often. He didn't slam his door anymore. His head tilted slightly when she spoke, as if trying to hear the truth behind her voice. Obiora could not see her, but he began to notice the difference. Her footsteps were light, unintrusive. Her voice had no bitterness, only calm. And when she said good morning, it didn't feel like a ritual. It felt like a prayer. Late one evening, he sat in the garden, face turned toward the breeze, and asked quietly, "Why are you so kind?" Adaobi, who had just placed his tea by the chair, paused mid-step. Her heart fluttered. "I don't know," she said softly. "Maybe because kindness was the only thing I wished someone had shown me." He didn't say anything after that, but that night she found her latest note sitting on the table. Beside it was something she hadn't seen since she entered the house. A small, unexpected smiley face, drawn in pen. She held it in her hands for a long time before folding it carefully and placing it under her pillow. The day it started, the rain had just stopped, and the breeze rolled in with the smell of wet soil and hibiscus flowers. Obiora was sitting in the garden, head tilted, as if listening to something only he could hear. Adaobi had come to leave his tea, the usual quiet exchange, but as she turned to leave, he spoke, his voice softer than usual. "Adaobi, what does the sky look like today?" She froze for a moment, caught off guard. "The sky?" "Yes," he said, his hand brushing the carved handle of the chair. "Tell me what I'm missing." She hesitated, then slowly sat on the edge of the stone bench near him, her voice low, unsure. "It's blue but soft, like it's just waking up. There are clouds, white and thick, shaped like cotton wool. The sun is peeking out, but not fully. It's shy today." Obiora turned his head toward her, a faint smile forming. "And the trees? They're dripping. The rain kissed them well. The leaves are dark green, and when the wind blows, they shimmer like they're dancing." That was the first time she spoke freely to him, not as a servant, not as a stranger, but as someone carrying her own world in words. From that day, he began to ask more questions. What are the flowers doing? Is the compound noisy? What do the clouds remind you of? And she would describe everything, down to the colour of the guard's uniform and the way the neighbour's child always cried at 4 p.m. The world she painted through her voice became his vision. Her words softened the edges of his darkness. Soon Obiora asked her to sit with him during meals. At first, she thought it was a mistake, but when he pulled out the chair beside him and waited, she obeyed, nervously. They talked while eating. Nothing big at first. How many spoons of rice she gave him, whether the pepper was too much. Then it shifted. He told her about his late father, how he missed arguing with him over business. She told him about her mother's akara and how it was the last thing she tasted before the fire took everything. Sometimes they sat for hours after eating, talking, breathing, healing. One night, as she passed him a book, their fingers brushed. Just for a second. He pulled his hand back quickly. "Sorry," he muttered, but Adaobi smiled. "It's okay." Her smile lingered long after she returned to her room. Something had changed. The mansion that once echoed with silence now had music again. Soft jazz from the living room stereo, laughter from the kitchen. Even the staff noticed. Obiora's steps were lighter. He whistled once, something he hadn't done since the accident. Adaobi found herself humming while folding clothes. Sometimes she caught herself waiting for the sound of his cane tapping or the soft call of her name. But at night, lying under her blanket, she would whisper into the dark, "Don't let this be a dream." Her heart beat faster when he smiled. Her palms grew warm when he laughed. She found herself wanting to be near him, not because she had to, but because something gentle and dangerous was blooming. But she dared not hope. "He'll never see me," she told herself, pressing her hand to her chest. "Not really. Not the way I want him to." Still, she returned to his side every day, describing sunsets and mango blossoms, pretending her voice was enough. And for a time, it was. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The gate creaked open, and in walked Chinwe, dressed in a tight-fitting pink gown that did little to hide the curve of her swollen belly. Her face was painted with makeup, but nothing could conceal the fatigue in her eyes, or the desperation. The driver who dropped her off didn't even wait for a thank you. He sped off as soon as her feet touched the driveway. Adaobi was in the kitchen peeling yam when she heard the voice, sharp, familiar, laced with entitlement. "Where is he? Where is Obiora?" She dropped the knife. Mama Chinwe entered right behind her daughter, more dramatic than ever. "You people think you can replace my child?" she barked, her wrapper flaring with every step. "You think marriage is for slaves? Obiora is her rightful husband, not that orphan girl." Adaobi stood frozen. Her hands were shaking, but she kept her eyes down. Chinwe's belly said more than words ever could. She wasn't just back. She was back with baggage and a plan. Obiora emerged from the study with his walking stick tapping gently. "Who's there?" Chinwe's voice turned sugar-sweet in a second. "Obiora, it's me. It's Chinwe." Obiora paused. The silence between them felt like a wall. "Why are you here?" "I came to apologize," she said softly, stepping closer. "I made a mistake. I was scared. But I never stopped thinking about you. I know I hurt you, but I want to fix it." Adaobi's heart clenched. She stood by the corridor, invisible yet burning. She wanted to believe he would tell Chinwe to leave, that he would defend her, the woman who had nursed his pain with quiet love. But Obiora said nothing. Mama Chinwe stepped in with full force. "This girl, this Adaobi, manipulated all of us. She wanted your money. She knew you were vulnerable and she used it to secure her place. She's been eyeing you since the day of Chinwe's rejection." "That's not true," Adaobi said, her voice trembling. But no one looked at her. Chinwe nodded quickly. "She's been pretending, acting all humble and kind, but it was all a plan. I came back to fix what she broke." Obiora didn't speak. His expression was unreadable. He turned away, gripping the edge of the wall for balance, and Adaobi knew. He was doubting her. That night, the mansion felt unfamiliar again. The music had stopped. The laughter had disappeared. Obiora stayed in his room. No words, no notes, no touch. The following morning, Adaobi placed his food on the table and waited. He didn't come. Hours passed. She knocked lightly on his door. "I'm not hungry," he said flatly. She stood there, staring at the door that once felt like a beginning, and now felt like an end. Over the next few days, Obiora remained distant. Adaobi found herself wandering the house like a stranger, her presence now unwelcome, her worth questioned. Chinwe walked around like she owned the place, flashing smiles and stroking her belly with performative care. By the 5th day, Adaobi had enough. She entered her room, pulled out her small box, and began to fold her wrapper slowly. Her hands trembled, but she didn't cry. Not this time. She stacked her few belongings neatly, as if leaving quietly might somehow make the pain less sharp. Obiora stood outside his study listening. He heard her footsteps, the creak of the box, the faint click of the lock. He moved closer, uncertain, confused. "You're leaving?" he asked, voice low. Adaobi looked up. Her eyes were dry but heavy. "Yes." "Why?" She smiled bitterly. "Because I was never truly wanted. Not by your family, not by you. I was just convenient." "Adaobi..." She raised her hand gently. "You don't have to say anything. Your silence already did." She lifted the box and walked toward the door. Each step felt like walking through mud, but she didn't stop. Obiora remained frozen in place, unsure whether to reach out or let her go. It was barely past 7 a.m. when Chuka, Obiora's younger cousin, knocked on his door with urgency in his voice and fire in his eyes. He wasn't the type to meddle, but something had been bothering him ever since Chinwe returned. That morning, curiosity became conviction when he borrowed her phone under the pretense of helping her transfer airtime and stumbled upon the truth. Chinwe had been messaging someone, her ex, the same man who abandoned her with a child. The chats were bold, unrepentant. She laughed about how she was using Obiora's blindness to buy time, how she'd claim her position back in the mansion and dump him once the child arrived. Voice notes followed. One of them had her saying, "That Adaobi thinks she's won, but I'll destroy her before this month ends. Obiora is too blind, literally, to know what's happening." Chuka's heart pounded as he transferred the files to his phone. The lies were deeper than he thought. Without waiting, he rushed to Obiora's room, where the man sat silently listening to soft music. Chuka spoke quickly, emotions bleeding through his voice. "You need to hear this. It's about Chinwe." Obiora didn't move until Chuka played the voice notes. The room fell into silence, only Chinwe's voice echoing in cruel, mocking tones. By the end, Obiora was pale, his hands clenched into fists. "All this time," he whispered. "She lied. They all did." "And Adaobi?" Chuka added. "She stayed, even when you turned away." Obiora didn't wait for more. He stood, grabbed his stick, and called for the driver. The ride to Adaobi's old compound was quiet. He sat in the back seat with his heart in his throat, wondering if he was too late, if his silence had already buried everything they had started to build. When the car pulled into the dusty compound, he didn't need directions. He could hear the soft splash of water, the scrape of stone. He followed the sound, step by step, until he reached the backyard. And there she was, on her knees beside a metal basin, soaked to the elbows, her wrapper clinging to her body, her tears falling silently into the soapy water. She didn't look up. She didn't have to. She knew who stood behind her. Obiora dropped his walking stick. "Adaobi!" She froze. Her shoulders tensed, but she didn't turn. "I came to say I'm sorry." She said nothing, only scrubbed harder, as if the cloth could carry away her pain. He stepped closer, then knelt beside her. The cold from the wet ground pierced through his trousers, but he didn't care. "I believed a lie. I let my doubts speak louder than everything you gave me." Her voice was low, tight. "Why now?" "I found the truth," he said, almost in a whisper. "Chuka showed me everything. Chinwe. She planned it. All of it. You," his voice broke, "you were the only one who stayed." Finally, she turned. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with soap and sadness. "Do you want me back? Because you know I didn't lie? Or because you finally feel guilty?" Obiora reached for her hand and held it gently. "I want you back because I saw more with you than I ever did with my eyes." Adaobi stared at him, searching for deceit, but all she saw was brokenness, honest, humbled, real. And in that silence, something shifted. She nodded slowly. "Then take me home." And this time he did, hand in hand. The journey to the hospital in South Africa was quiet. Obiora sat by the plane window, staring into darkness, but his thoughts were alive with movement. The doctors had said there was a possibility, a small one, that his sight could be restored through a complex surgical procedure. It wasn't guaranteed, but for the first time in a long while, he wanted to try. Not just for himself, but for her. Before boarding, he turned to Adaobi and gently held her hand. "If this works," he said, voice low and trembling, "I want you to be the first thing I see." Adaobi had smiled, holding back tears. "Then I'll be there, no matter what." The days in the hospital felt like years. The surgery took 6 hours. Adaobi sat in the waiting room, fingers clenched tightly around a worn leather Bible. She prayed, not just for his sight, but for peace, for closure, for clarity. She prayed that even if he never saw her, he would never doubt what they had become to each other. When the doctor finally came out, his face was unreadable. "The surgery went well," he said, "but we'll only know the results when we remove the bandages." 3 days later, they sat in a dim hospital room. The nurse moved quietly, unwrapping the layers from Obiora's face. Adaobi stood by his side, holding his hand, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear herself breathe. Then, light. For the first time in years, Obiora blinked against the gentle brightness streaming in through the window. He turned his head slowly towards her. And then, he saw her. There was no makeup on Adaobi's face. Her wrapper was simple, her blouse slightly wrinkled. But her eyes, those eyes he had only imagined in his dreams, were deep and trembling. Her lips parted slightly, unsure. His chest tightened. Tears pooled in his eyes as he reached out, trembling. He touched her cheek, soft and warm under his palm. "You," he whispered, voice breaking. "You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Adaobi broke. Her tears spilled freely, her shoulders shaking as she crumbled into his arms. She didn't care who was watching. She didn't care how she looked. She only knew that in this moment, after all the pain, all the silence, all the doubt, he finally saw her. Not just with his eyes, but with his heart. The village square had never seen such a wedding. Months had passed since Obiora regained his sight, and everything about him had changed. His walk, his smile, the warmth in his voice. But nothing had changed more than the way he looked at Adaobi, like she was the son he never knew he needed. Palm trees lined the aisle, and the canopies fluttered in the breeze as live drums echoed through the air. Guests poured in from every corner, neighbors, friends, even strangers who had heard the story of the blind man who found love in the most unexpected place. This time there was no secrecy, no shame, no forced vows in quiet corners. Adaobi walked slowly down the red carpet, her white lace gown shimmering under the soft afternoon light. Her steps were graceful, her face glowing, not with makeup, but with peace. Her eyes locked with Obiora's at the altar, and he smiled, the same smile that had become her anchor. When the officiant asked if he had anything to say, Obiora stepped forward and turned to the crowd. "She was the one who saw me. When I could see nothing," he began, his voice firm yet emotional. "When I had given up on light, she became it. Today I marry not just the woman who stood by me, but the one who healed me." From a distance, Mama Chinwe and Chinwe stood silently in the crowd. Their eyes held the bitter weight of defeat. No applause greeted them. No pity. Only the realization that what they tried to destroy had blossomed in spite of them. As Obiora took Adaobi's hand, he slid a gold band onto her finger and whispered, "This is our beginning, not a repayment." Tears filled Adaobi's eyes as she nodded, her voice trembling. "And I choose you, again and again." They sealed their vows with a kiss, not just before a priest, but before a town that now believed in second chances. And as the drums picked up again and guests danced into the evening, Adaobi leaned into Obiora's arms, her heart full at last. This time, it was love. Real, loud, and everlasting. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful drama. Your support helps me continue bringing you emotional, inspiring, and unforgettable stories. Thank you for watching.